I woke to the sound of tapping. Not the harmless drip of condensation from the roof or the distant knock of branches in the wind. This was deliberate, rhythmic, like fingers rapping on metal. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. I lay still on my cot, heartbeat loud in my ears. The outpost was supposed to be unapproachable at night. Perimeter fence topped with barbed wire, motion sensors, and only one narrow track in or out. Nearest town was 70 miles away. No one should be here. The tapping stopped, replaced by silence so thick I could hear my own breath. I reached for the rifle prop beside the bed. The cold metal steadied me. I slid my boots on without tying the laces, eased the door latch, and stepped into the night. The cold hit me first, a sharp bite that stung my skin. The moon hung low and bloated, spilling a pale wash over the snow-dusted ground. The trees formed a jagged black wall around the clearing, their skeletal branches twisting like fingers toward the sky. Nothing moved. I swept my flashlight along the fence. No break, no prints in the snow except my own from earlier that afternoon. But the air felt wrong, too still. No wind, no rustle of leaves, not even the distant howl of coyotes I'd grown used to on previous deployments. Then I saw them. 2 faint points of light, low among the trees, reflecting the beam of my flashlight. They weren't the green glint of an animal's eyes. They were amber, deep, molten, unblinking. I froze. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, didn't flinch from the light. They just stared. The rifle's weight in my hands was suddenly meaningless. I could feel my pulse thudding against the trigger guard, but I didn't raise the weapon. Some deep animal part of me knew it wouldn't matter. I backed toward the door, my boots crunching in the snow far too loudly. The moment I reached the threshold, the eyes vanished. No, but like they turned away, but like they were never there to begin with. Inside, I locked the door and stood with my back pressed against it, listening. The tapping didn't return. Neither did any other sound. It was nearly dawn before exhaustion pulled me under. Morning didn't make it feel better. The outpost was small. 1 prefab barracks, a comms shack, fuel shed, and watchtower, all huddled inside a wire perimeter. The Army called it Station 47, a low-traffic monitoring point meant for routine surveillance of the borderland forests. My orders were simple: man the station, log anomalies, maintain radio check-ins with command twice daily. I'd been told this was solo duty. Easiest assignment you'll ever get, the lieutenant had said, shoving the deployment papers into my hands. Think of it as paid camping with a gun. I'd laughed at the time. Now, stepping out into the brittle morning air, I wasn't laughing. The snow at the tree line was undisturbed. No prints, no trails. But I knew what I'd seen. Those eyes hadn't been a trick of light or fatigue. They'd been watching me. I tried to shake it off, focusing on my routine, checking fuel levels, running diagnostics on the motion sensors, logging the night's incident in the report file. When I tried to write tapping on siding, my pen stalled over the paper. Somehow that description felt insufficient. By noon, the sky had turned the dull color of gunmetal, and the forest seemed closer than it had yesterday, as if the tree line had crept in while I wasn't looking. That night, I decided to keep the rifle closer, just in case the eyes came back. The forest looked different in daylight. From the watchtower, the tree line stretched in every direction, a dark, rippling wall of pine and birch. Morning frost clung to every branch, making the world shimmer like it had been dipped in glass. It should have been beautiful, peaceful even. It wasn't. I'd been stationed at plenty of lonely posts before, but something about this place gnawed at the back of my skull. It wasn't just the tapping from last night or the eyes that had glowed like embers in the dark. It was the way the forest waited. From up here, I could see how still it really was. No birds flitting between branches, no squirrels scrambling over trunks, no distant flutter of wings or rustle of leaves. It was as if every living thing had agreed to stay silent. I scanned the tree line through binoculars. No movement, no heat signatures, just trees. And yet, I couldn't shake the sensation that the trees were looking back. By midday, I'd finished the perimeter checks. No breaches, no tracks, no reason to feel the crawling sensation on the back of my neck. And yet, it was there, steady as a heartbeat. The comms unit crackled. Station 47, report. 47, all clear, I said, My voice sounded too loud in the cramped shack. Copy that. Resupply still on schedule. Anything to log? I hesitated. Nothing conclusive. That was the truth. Or at least the version command would accept. You couldn't put, "The forest feels like it's staring at me," in a military log and expect to be taken seriously. After the call, I sat by the narrow window and stared out at the snow-dusted pines. My breath fogged the glass. The moment I wiped it clear, I froze. Something had shifted. Not moved. Shifted. Like when you glance at a puzzle you've been working on and suddenly realize one piece has been flipped upside down. The tree line wasn't exactly where it had been. In this morning, I could have sworn there'd been 20 yards of open ground between the fence and the nearest tree line. Now it was 15, maybe less. I stepped outside, boots crunching in the frost. Measured it in my head. It had to be my imagination. Trees didn't just move. Still, I kept my rifle slung over my shoulder for the rest of the afternoon. Night fell fast. One moment, the sky was streaked with orange. The next, it was a slab of black, the kind you only see in places where no light pollution softens the edges. The outpost's floodlights snapped on automatically, casting harsh white beams across the perimeter. That was when I saw them again. Two amber eyes, just inside the tree line, same height as before, same stillness. Only this time, they weren't alone. Another set glimmered a few feet to the left, then another, and another. 4 pairs in total, each locked in my direction, unblinking, patient. My mouth went dry. I raised the rifle halfway, not to shoot, just to remind myself I had it. The eyes didn't flinch. If anything, they seemed to lean forward slightly, as if curious. I backed toward the comms shack, never turning my back to them. But before I reached the door, the floodlights flickered. Just once, barely more than a blink. And when they steadied, the eyes were gone. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. The forest was watching, and I was starting to wonder if it had always been this close. By the third night, I'd given up trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Something was out there. The day passed in a blur of routine. Perimeter check, fuel levels, sensor diagnostics. But I kept catching glimpses out of the corner of my eye. Not shapes exactly, just shifts in the texture of the tree line, like a shadow slipping behind a trunk. Every time I turned to look directly, there was nothing. The stillness was starting to get to me. The forest wasn't supposed to be silent. Even here, this far from civilization, there should have been woodpeckers, the chatter of small animals, the wind shifting through branches. But the silence was complete, like a blanket pressed over the world. Around dusk, I climbed the watchtower with the night vision scope. I told myself it was to check for deer or maybe a stray bear, but I knew I was really looking for those eyes again. At first, nothing. Just the jagged teeth of trees, glowing pale green through the lens. Then a flicker of movement. It was slow, deliberate. A tall, narrow figure stepped between the trees, just inside the edge of visibility. It moved in a way that made my stomach knot. Too smooth, too fluid, as if its joints bent in the wrong places. I adjusted the focus, and it stopped. Stood perfectly still, watching me. I froze, breath shallow, the scope trembling slightly in my hands. It was impossible to make out its face, just a silhouette, tall enough that its head brushed the lower branches. Then it began to move again. Not toward me, but along the perimeter, pacing. I tracked it as it slipped in and out of sight between trunks. Every time I lost it, it would reappear several feet farther along, still facing the outpost. When it finally reached the far corner of the perimeter, it stopped and tilted its head, a slow, unnatural tilt, like a predator sizing up prey. And then it was gone. Ott walked away, not faded into the darkness, just gone. I stayed in the tower for another hour, scanning. No sign of movement, but the sense of being watched never left. Even when I forced myself to climb down, my legs felt shaky, as if I'd been standing at attention for hours. Inside the barracks, I double-checked every lock, every latch, even shoved a chair under the doorknob. It felt ridiculous, a grown soldier barricading himself inside like some panicked civilian. But fear has a way of making you pragmatic. Around midnight, the radio crackled. I grabbed the receiver. "Station 47, go ahead." Only static answered. I adjusted the frequency, thinking maybe command was trying to reach me on another channel. That was when I heard it. Not static. Breathing. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The kind of breath you hear when someone is standing right next to the microphone. I froze, the receiver slick in my hand. Then, in a voice so low I almost thought I imagined it, came 2 words. "Still watching." I slammed the receiver down so hard it rattled on the desk. My skin was crawling, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't sleep. I just sat by the window with the rifle across my lap, staring at the tree line, waiting for those eyes to appear again. But the forest stayed dark, silent, patient. And I knew, whatever was out there, it was waiting for something. The logbook wasn't supposed to be interesting. Every station had one, a thick spiral-bound notebook where each soldier recorded the day's events, maintenance checks, and any anomalies worth reporting. 90% of the entries at other outposts were mind-numbingly boring. Weather notes, fuel readings, equipment malfunctions. But Station 47's logbook was different. I found it on the bottom shelf in the comms shack, tucked under a pile of outdated field manuals. The cover was frayed, edges curled from damp. The first few pages were exactly what I expected. Day 1, arrival, supplies intact, weather cold but clear. Day 2, no anomalies, fuel levels at 72%, routine. Then, halfway through the book, the handwriting changed. The neat block letters gave way to quick, uneven scrawl. The dates stopped lining up with standard reporting, skipping days, sometimes weeks. There's something in the trees. Tall, pale. It doesn't move when I look at it. Stopped sleeping. It waits for me to close my eyes. I felt my throat tighten as I flipped through more entries. The writer, no name, no rank noted, had grown increasingly erratic. Some pages were filled with scribbled sketches of eyes, dozens of them, always in pairs, always the same almond shape, always shaded dark. One entry was written so hard, the pen tore through the paper. "Do not look too long. It knows when you see it." I kept reading. The last few entries were short, frantic, knocking on the siding again. This time, it's higher up. Heard my own voice calling me from the trees. 3 sets of eyes now, watching together. And then, the final line, written in letters so jagged they almost looked like scratches. "If someone finds this, don't let them replace me." I closed the book, palms damp. I should have called command, reported the contents, maybe even requested a rotation out, but I knew how it would sound. They'd chalk it up to isolation fatigue, maybe a soldier who cracked under boredom. And yet, it didn't feel like boredom. It felt like a warning. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened again, heavy with low clouds. I did my rounds, but every step along the perimeter felt longer than the last. I kept catching myself glancing toward the trees, waiting for a flash of pale skin or the burn of amber eyes. I told myself not to look too long. That night, I placed the logbook on the desk beside me. The floodlights bathed the snow in white glare, but beyond their reach, the forest was pure black. I thought I saw a shape between the pines, tall, motionless, but I forced myself to look away after only a second. Hours passed. The wind picked up, rattling the siding, whistling through the seams in the walls. I tried to convince myself that was all it was, just wind. Then came the sound, a faint tap-tap-tap on the far wall. My chest tightened. I stood, rifle ready, and stepped to the door. The tapping stopped the instant my hand touched the latch. I hesitated, the logbook's warning flashing in my head. Slowly, I stepped back. The wind howled. The metal creaked. Somewhere, deep in the tree line, I thought I heard a single word whispered in a voice I didn't recognize. Closer. The radio came alive at 02:14 hours. I'd been sitting at the desk, fighting to keep my eyes open, The logbook opened beside me like some talisman I wasn't sure how to use. Outside, the forest was motionless under the glare of the floodlights, and I was beginning to believe, maybe, I'd get through the night without incident. Then the static hissed, sharp enough to make me flinch. "Station 47, come in," I said, reaching for the receiver. My voice was a little too quick, too eager. Command didn't usually call at this hour. At first, nothing but the crackle, then a voice, faint, distorted, barely more than a whisper. "Help, please, I'm cold." Every muscle in my body went rigid. It was a man's voice, shaky, desperate. "This is 47, I said. "Identify yourself." No answer, just the sound of breathing, ragged and slow. "Identify yourself, or I can't help you," I repeated, forcing authority into my tone. Then came the words that froze the air in my lungs. "They're watching me from the trees." I felt my grip tighten on the receiver. "Where are you?" I asked. A pause, then softly, "Outside." The breath in my chest turned to ice. I swiveled in my chair, eyes scanning the windows. The floodlights painted the snow in harsh white, but the tree line beyond remained black and impenetrable. The voice on the radio grew quieter, like the speaker was moving away from the mic. "Come, open the door. It's so cold." Something inside me screamed not to move. Every instinct drilled into me over the years, the training, the protocols, told me this wasn't right. "Stay where you are," I said. "I'll alert command." "No," the voice snapped, sudden and sharp, then softer again. "Please, don't leave me here. I can't feel my legs." It was the tone that got me. There was something wrong in it, like someone wearing a human voice that didn't quite fit. I reached over and flicked the comms to command's channel. 47 to command, possible stranded civilian near perimeter, requesting. Static swallowed the rest of my words. When the channel cleared, the voice was back. Not command. "You don't need to call them," it said, lower now, almost playful. I stood, heart hammering, and stepped to the window. And there it was. A figure, just inside the tree line. Tall, thin, the outline wrong in a way I couldn't name. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was studying me. The radio hissed in my hand, and the voice spoke again, perfectly clear this time. "Closer." I backed away from the glass, forcing my shaking hands to set the receiver down. The floodlights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The figure was gone. For the rest of the night, I didn't touch the radio again. I sat at the desk with the rifle across my lap, the logbook open to that torn page. Don't let them replace me. By dawn, I was half convinced the voice had been some stress-induced hallucination, until I stepped outside for perimeter check. In the snow, just beyond the fence line, were footprints. Human-shaped, bare feet, each one pressed deep into the frost as if whoever had made them weighed far more than a man ever could. They led from the trees to the exact spot I'd seen the figure, and then nothing. No prints leading away, just that single, frozen trail from the forest to my door. They shouldn't have been there. Fresh footprints in the snow, laid down sometime between 02:14 and dawn. No wind overnight to cover them, no drifting snow. Each step pressed so deep into the frost it had left the edges sharp, perfectly defined. But it wasn't just that they were barefoot, it was the size. The prints were too long, at least 13 inches from heel to toe, and too narrow for the proportions to make sense. The toes weren't rounded like a human's either. They tapered to points, almost claw-like. And the gait, it was wrong. The steps were spaced farther apart than a man could comfortably walk. Every print faced directly forward, no splay, no signs of a shift in balance. It was as if whatever made them glided forward without any natural movement. I followed them along the inside of the fence, rifle slung but ready. They stopped exactly where I'd seen the figure the night before. From there, the snow was untouched. No sign of retreat, no smudge where the body might have shifted its weight. Just absence. It was as though it had stepped into existence and then stepped right back out. I circled the perimeter twice, scanning for more tracks. Nothing. No sign of wildlife, no tire marks from the resupply truck. Even the drifts were untouched. The forest loomed in silence, that same unnatural stillness pressing against my eardrums like altitude sickness. Back inside, I sat with the logbook again. My mind kept drifting to the entry about knocking higher up, higher than the siding that would put it above the windows, which meant whatever it was could climb. The next page was a crude drawing of the outpost. 4 walls, the tower, the fence. Dozens of little eye shapes ringed the outer edges. Some had lines leading from them toward the building. Beneath it, a single phrase: "They don't leave prints when they don't want to." By afternoon, the temperature had dropped. The sun was a pale disk hidden behind thin, bruised clouds. I ran system checks on the motion sensors. All green, no triggers in the last 24 hours. That was impossible. Something had been right there at the fence, close enough to stare into the glass. Either the sensors were malfunctioning, or it could pass through their beams without setting them off. I made a note to check the wiring tomorrow. That night I climbed the tower again. From up there the prints were barely visible, faint depressions in the moonlit snow. I swept the night vision scope across the trees, willing something to appear so I could at least feel like I wasn't losing my mind. Hours passed. My eyes ached from staring through the scope. Then movement. Not at the ground, but higher up. A shape slid between the branches, 20 feet off the forest floor. It moved with a strange, liquid grace, no sound, no visible effort. When it stopped, I saw the curve of its head tilt toward the tower. The same wrong proportions, the same height. And then, even through the heavy night air, I heard it. A voice. Not from the radio this time. From out there. "I see you." The words were drawn out, stretched unnaturally, as if the speaker wasn't used to the shape of them. I gripped the rifle, aiming into the branches, but when I blinked, it was gone. The forest was empty again. But I could still feel the weight of its gaze. Resupply was supposed to arrive every 7 days. Standard drop, fuel drums, MRE crates, ammo, and sometimes a carton of coffee if the guy in logistics was in a good mood. It wasn't much, but the routine was a lifeline in places like this. Proof the rest of the world still existed beyond the snow and trees. Day 7 came and went. No truck. By midday on day 8, I was pacing the comm shack, radio in hand. I keyed the mic. "Command, this is Station 47, requesting status on resupply." Static. I tried again. "Command 47, come in." Finally, a burst of static resolved into a clipped, measured voice. 47, command here. Supply convoys delayed. Weather conditions. I glanced out the window. The sky was clear, cold blue. No wind, no snow, not even cloud cover. Say again? Weather's fine here. Copy. Convoy will be there when it can. Hold position. The channel clicked dead. That answer didn't sit right. Weather delays happened, but command was usually eager to give a new ETA. This was different. Short, final, almost rehearsed. Fuel levels were fine for now, ammo was stocked, but food was tighter than I liked, and it wasn't just the supplies I needed, it was the face-to-face. Even a 2-minute exchange at drop-off was a reminder I wasn't alone. Now, the silence felt heavier than the frost in the air. That night, I decided to keep the tower shift until dawn. My thermos steamed in the freezing air as I scanned the trees. The prints from 2 nights ago had iced over, edges dulled, but the memory of them was sharp. Hours passed. My body grew stiff from the cold. Then, around 0300, movement. Not at the tree line this time. Beyond it, shapes. Through the scope, I counted 3. They moved together, their pacing deliberate. Not human. Their limbs bent too far, knees and elbows inverting slightly as they walked, even through night vizies. On, their skin looked pale, almost reflective. I kept the crosshairs on the lead shape, but a strange certainty rooted me in place. If I fired, I wouldn't kill it. I'd just make it notice me more. The shapes disappeared between the trees. I kept scanning for another hour, but they didn't return. The next morning, I called command again. 47 to command, requesting confirmation on ETA for supply drop. This time, a new voice answered. Negative on ETA. Maintain standard operating procedure. Negative, that's not 47. Acknowledge. Acknowledged. The line went dead. I stared at the radio, heat prickling under my skin despite the cold. Something was off. Command wasn't just delaying. They didn't want anyone here right now. Or maybe they didn't want anyone coming to Station 47. The logbook's last entry echoed in my head. Don't let them replace me. By evening, the wind had picked up, rattling the siding. The floodlights swayed on their mounts, casting shadows that seemed to reach and twist against the snow. Then, as I was securing the fuel shed, I saw something nailed to the inside of the fence. A scrap of fabric, olive drab. An army sleeve. It was stiff with frost, the patch still visible. Same unit insignia as mine, but the fabric was torn jaggedly, as if ripped straight from the uniform, and it was nailed at eye level, facing inward toward me. I didn't sleep that night. The sleeve on the fence had been too deliberate to dismiss, placed there for me to find, positioned like a calling card. I kept my rifle propped against the cot and the radio volume high. The wind had died down, but the silence after it was worse, like the world was holding its breath. At 02:57, the first sound came. A tap. Not on the outer fence, not on the tower supports, on the wall of my quarters. 3 short knocks, measured, patient. I froze mid-reach for my rifle, straining to listen. My mind tried to find an explanation. Maybe a branch blown loose, maybe frost cracking the siding. But no, the sound had weight, intent. Another tap, 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 same rhythm. I moved slow, sliding my feet over the floor to avoid creaks, positioning myself so I could look through the narrow side window without exposing my head too much. Nothing but snow and the faint glow of the nearest floodlight. But then, movement. Something, someone, stepped just far enough into the light for me to see part of a leg, pale, bare skin against the cold. Not human bare. No hair, no clothing, just smooth, almost glossy flesh. The thing stood there for a long moment. Then it bent, unnaturally low, like its spine was made of rope. One long arm reached forward and wrapped its knuckles against the wall again, so close I could hear the wood vibrate. I lifted the rifle and sighted in, breath steady. The scope's crosshairs hovered over the pale curve of its thigh, but the thing pulled back, melting into the darkness so fast I wondered if my eyes had lied. The rest of the night I stayed in the chair by the window, watching. I didn't see it again, but I heard it. Faint crunches of snow circling the building, never coming too close, never fully leaving. By morning, my nerves felt like frayed wire. I did a perimeter sweep, boots crunching in snow crusted over with icy, and that's when I saw it. A second scrap of fabric nailed to the outside of the fence this time. Not army green, civilian, plaid, maybe from a flannel shirt. The edges were stiff with something dark, frozen into the fibers. Blood. I pried it loose and pocketed it. I called command again. 47 to command. I need immediate confirmation. Is anyone else operating in my sector? Static. Command, do you copy? After a pause, the same clipped voice from yesterday. 47, maintain standard operating procedure. I slammed the mic down hard enough to make the radio crackle. SOP didn't cover this. At 1500 hours, the light started fading, early even for this far north. The forest looked like black teeth against the snow. I adjusted the tower scope, scanning. Nothing moved. Then the radio crackled on its own. No call sign, no preamble, just breathing, slow, steady, close to the mic. Command, I said. The breathing stopped. Then, don't let them replace you. It was the same words from the logbook. The voice wasn't one I recognized, and it wasn't coming from command's frequency. That night, I barricaded the door from the inside. Desk, chair, anything with weight. I cut the floodlights except for one, aimed directly at the main gate. If they wanted me to see them, they'd have to step into that beam. At 0300, the knocks came again, louder. 3 slow raps on the wall. This time, when I looked, the thing was standing full in the light, and it was smiling. It stood in the floodlight's center like it had been waiting for this moment. The thing's skin wasn't white so much as absence of color. Not pale like a corpse, but blank, like someone had erased every detail from its surface. No hair, no clothes, just smooth, featureless flesh, stretched over something too thin to be human. Its grin was the worst part. Not lips over teeth. There were no teeth. Just a wide curve split into its face, black inside, as if the smile went straight into emptiness. It didn't move when I raised the rifle, didn't blink, didn't breathe. I squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the clearing, echoing through the trees. The figure dropped instantly, folding like a marionette with its strings cut. But before I could even lower the rifle, it was gone. No twitching, no crawling. Just gone, as if it had been scooped out of existence. I didn't sleep. I paced the tower until my boots wore a groove into the floor. When dawn came, I went down to check the spot where it fell. Nothing. No body, no blood, not even footprints. The snow was untouched. I'd just reached the fence when I saw it. A section of chain link along the east perimeter had been peeled back. The wires weren't cut. They were bent outward, like something inside had forced its way out. I followed the warped section to where it met the ground. There were tracks. Not boots, not paws. Long, narrow impressions with 4 splayed digits, each tipped with a sharp point that had punctured the ice. They led into the trees. Back inside, I tried the radio. "Command, this is 47, perimeter breach, possible hostile infiltration. Request immediate support." Static answered. I slammed the receiver down and turned back to the window. The forest line seemed closer than yesterday. I counted my ammo, 3 full mags, 1 sidearm, enough to hold for a while if I stayed smart. But the bent fence haunted me. Whatever it was hadn't been trying to get in. It had been leaving, which meant there had been more than one. By 1600, the wind picked up. The snow came fast, blinding, making the floodlights look like blurred halos. The storm swallowed sound, muffling everything except the occasional groan of the tower supports. That's when I heard the metal creak. Not the storm, not the wind. The sound of weight shifting against the fence. I grabbed my rifle and threw on my coat, pushing into the blizzard. The snow stung my eyes, my breath freezing in my beard. Visibility was down to maybe 10 feet, but I could make out a shape pressed against the perimeter. Tall, hunched, shoving at the chain link. I shouted, "Back away from the fence!" The shape turned. 2 black pits where eyes should have been caught the light, and the thing lunged. The fence didn't slow it. The link snapped like wet paper. It poured through the gap, all limbs and impossible angles, moving too fast to track. I fired 3 times. The recoil thudded into my shoulder, but the rounds didn't even stagger it. It vanished into the storm, circling. I backed toward the tower door, keeping the rifle up, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own boots on the snow. Then, silence. No wind, no snow. Nothing. The quiet lasted maybe 3 seconds before something slammed into the wall behind me hard enough to rattle the whole structure. When I got back inside, every floodlight was dead except the one over the gate, and in that beam stood 2 of them now. They didn't move. The 2 figures stood in the floodlight's cone like statues, identical in their wrongness. Tall, featureless, skin the color of bone left too long in the sun. Their heads tilted in unison, slow, deliberate, like they were studying me through the glass. I raised the rifle, sighting the one on the left. My finger tightened on the trigger, and both figures stepped backward in perfect sync, vanishing into the storm. For a second I thought they were gone. Then I heard it. A scraping sound along the base of the tower, like claws dragging across steel. Then another from the opposite side. My brain scrambled to process it. There were at least 2, maybe more, circling. I forced myself to think. The tower's ground level was just a storage area and generator room, reinforced but not impenetrable. If they got through that door, I'd have maybe 30 seconds before they were up the stairs. I checked my watch. 1840. Night was closing in. The storm made it worse. Even with floodlights, visibility was trash. I pulled the blackout covers over the observation windows and switched the interior to red light. If they couldn't see me, maybe they'd hesitate. The scraping stopped. That's when the knocking started. Not fists, not random thuds. It was rhythmic. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 3 again. They moved from wall to wall, always at ground level, like they were testing the metal. My skin crawled. These things weren't mindless predators. They were probing. I crouched near the window slit, peeking out. The snow was so thick the floodlights looked like drowning suns. Their beams swallowed a few feet from the source. No movement, no shapes, just storm. Then I saw it, a hand, long pale fingers curling around the steel railing of the staircase. It was testing the steps. I swung the rifle and fired. The shot cracked like thunder. The hand vanished, instantly. But as the echo faded, I heard it. Not a scream, but a laugh. Soft, low, wrong. I moved back to the center of the room, forcing my breath to slow. If they wanted me rattled, they were doing a damn good job. I needed to conserve ammo. Blind firing into snow wouldn't cut it. The generator rumbled below. If they took that out, I'd lose lights, heat, and the radio. My last link to anything resembling help. I slung the rifle and grabbed my sidearm, heading for the hatch. The moment I cracked it open, the cold hit like a physical blow. My breath crystallized in the beam of my flashlight. I swept it over the stairwell. Clear. The generator room door stood at the bottom, secured with a heavy latch. Halfway down, the sound came again. Not scraping, not knocking. This time it was footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Inside the generator room. I froze. Flashlight trained on the door. The latch was still in place. No way anything had gotten in without breaking it. The footsteps stopped. I took one step closer. The metal was cold enough to burn my skin when I touched it. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Then, 3 knocks. From the inside. I bolted back up, slammed the hatch, and locked it. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the pistol. When I pulled the blackout cover aside to check the floodlight, there were now 4 figures standing there. And they were closer. They were closer now. I could see them more clearly in the floodlight's glare. Their bodies too long, their limbs slightly bent in ways human joints shouldn't allow. Their heads were smooth, almost featureless, but faint ridges hinted at eyes that weren't exactly where they should be. 4 of them, standing silent in the snow. The wind whipped their loose, grayish skin like fabric. None of them moved. At first, the one on the far right stepped forward, deliberate, like it wanted me to see every inch of its advance. My pulse was hammering so loud it felt like the sound filled the tower. I kept the rifle on it, finger ready. But then the leftmost figure suddenly darted toward the base of the tower, moving faster than I could track. It wasn't running like a person, it was crawling, but upright, its arms hooking the ground like insect legs. The steel base groaned as it hit, then came a sharp metallic ping. I dropped low, knowing they were trying to split my focus. The floodlight still cut through the snow, but only in fragments. Sometimes one figure would vanish completely into the white, only to reappear somewhere else in the circle of light. Then I heard it, the sound I dreaded. Metal tearing. I scrambled to the hatch, rifle slung, sidearm ready. The sound was coming from the generator room again. This time, there was no mistaking it. Something was forcing its way in. The tearing turned to a grinding, like a lock being twisted until it broke. I threw the hatch open and descended the narrow stairs 2 at a time. The cold made my teeth ache. When I hit the bottom, I saw it. The latch on the generator door was bent nearly in half. The metal around it looked like it had been peeled back, not broken. The door hung slightly ajar, swaying with the wind, except there was no wind inside. I aimed the pistol with one hand and pushed it open. The smell hit fur. Wet earth, like a freshly dug grave. The generator's steady hum was still going, but there was something else. A slow, wet drip. My flashlight swept the room. At first, nothing. Then, in the far corner, I saw it. One of them. It was crouched low, its back to me, pale spine arching unnaturally under the thin skin. Long fingers rested on the floor, splayed like it was feeling the vibrations of the generator. Its head tilted slightly. It knew I was there. I froze. every muscle locking. My breathing went shallow. The thing didn't move for several seconds that felt like hours. Then, in one impossibly smooth motion, it rotated its head a full 180 degrees without turning its body. Its face, if you could call it that, had no mouth. Just two deep, wet, black pits where eyes should be. I fired. The shot hit center mass, and the creature lurched backward, collapsing against the wall. The sound it made was not pain. It was more like an exhale of air escaping from deep underground. But before I could fire again, it shot upward, limbs snapping into a spider-like stance. It bolted toward the far wall and, impossibly, climbed straight up it, disappearing through the ventilation shaft. I stood there, gun trembling in my grip, heart slamming against my ribs. Then I heard the generator sputter. Back upstairs, the floodlight flickered once, twice, then died. The tower went black. Through the darkness, I could hear movement on the stairs. Not one set of steps, many. The sound of footsteps on the tower's stairs was wrong. Not heavy boots like a soldier's, but a faint tapping, uneven, almost delicate, as if claws were striking metal. I pulled back from the stairwell, my pistol raised, ears straining in the darkness. The generator's last hum was gone now, replaced by the deep silence of an Arctic night, broken only by that unnatural tap, tap, tap. Somewhere below, a door creaked open. I knew every hinge in this place. That one came from the supply room, 2 floors down, which meant they were already inside. I backed into my quarters and slammed the door, sliding the bolt into place. My breathing echoed too loud in the stillness, and I forced myself to slow it down. Sweat trickled along my spine despite the cold. There was no backup power for the floodlight. The army never thought one man would need it out here. My flashlight was in my pack, but in this kind of darkness, turning it on would be like firing a flare into enemy territory. The steps stopped. Silence again. That was worse. Then, a scrape. Something sliding slowly along the outside of my door. Fingertips? Claws? I couldn't tell. I braced the pistol with both hands and aimed at chest height, my eyes locked on the faint outline of the doorway. The scrape continued down to the floor, then paused. A long, slow inhale on the other side. I swallowed hard. "Back off!" I barked, voice cracking. There was no reply, not in words, just a low thrum, deep and vibrating through the metal like the hum of a massive machine. The bolt rattled, once, twice. Suddenly, the door dented inward. Not much, but enough to pop my ears. The frame groaned as if under a hydraulic press. Whatever was out there was testing it. I stepped back, heart hammering. Another impact, this one harder, the metal bending. The bolt held, but I could hear screws shifting in the frame. I glanced to the small secondary exit in the corner, a hatch leading to the ladder that ran down the outside of the tower. Using it meant being exposed to the open night, and whatever else was in the snow. But if the door gave way, I'd have no choice. The next hit came. This time, the bolt snapped. The door swung open 6 inches before I slammed my shoulder against it. On the other side, something pressed back, stronger than me by far. Through the gap, I saw it. Just an eye. Glossy, black, wet, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. I shoved with all I had, firing blindly through the opening. The shot exploded in the narrow space, deafening me. The pressure eased. The thing staggered back. I seized the moment, grabbed my pack, and kicked open the hatch. The cold outside was instant and vicious. The ladder's rungs burned against my gloves. I started down fast, boots scraping metal, breath coming hard. Halfway down, I looked up. Something was peering over the edge of the hatch, hanging upside down. One of them. Its head turned sideways, studying me. It began to climb down after me, but it didn't use the ladder. Its limbs bent backward, and it simply crawled along the wall of the tower like a lizard. I jumped the last 8 feet, hit the snow hard, rolled, and scrambled to my feet. The forest was a black wall ahead, and the sky above was moonless. The outpost loomed behind me, floodlight dead, silent except for the tap, tap, tap of something descending. I ran. The snow swallowed my footsteps instantly, but I knew sound wasn't my only problem. Those things didn't hunt like men. They felt you, as if the night itself told them where you were. I tore through the crusted drifts, the forest's edge looming like a black wall ahead. My lungs burned in the frigid air, each breath dragging needles into my chest. Behind me, the tap, tap, tap grew quicker. The creature wasn't running. It didn't need to. It was gaining on me without effort. I hit the first trees and ducked low, slipping between trunks. The canopy above was so dense it turned the night into ink. My eyes strained for any scrap of contrast. A pale branch, a patch of snow, anything to keep from slamming into something head first. The air inside the tree line felt heavier. The wind that cut across the outpost didn't reach here. Instead, the forest smelled faintly of rot and copper, like old blood. A snap of a twig to my right. I froze, one hand against a rough pine trunk. My breath came in quick bursts, too loud. Another sound, not from the ground this time, but from above. I tilted my head back slowly. Something was clinging to the trunk 20 feet up, motionless. At first I thought it was part of the tree, the outline too still to be alive. Then it shifted, joints bending wrong, head rotating a full quarter turn without moving its body. It didn't leap, it didn't scream. It just began to descend, limbs wrapping and unwrapping in slow, fluid motions. I backed away, trying to stay silent. The snow here was thin, patches of dead leaves crackling underfoot. Each sound felt like an alarm bell. That's when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Another shape, low to the ground, sliding between trunks. Its limbs seemed too long, its body almost gliding. I was being herded. I pivoted and bolted deeper into the woods. Branches slapped my face and tore at my parka, and the darkness was a living thing here, heavy, pressing in, eating the shapes around me. Somewhere ahead, water gurgled faintly. A stream. If I could cross it, maybe I could throw off their trail. The sound grew louder until the trees broke and the icy ribbon appeared, no more than 5 feet across, but running fast. I stepped in without thinking. The shock of the cold bit through my boots instantly, water rushing around my shins. My legs numbed almost instantly, but I forced myself across, stumbling onto the opposite bank. Silence again. Too much silence. I crouched, scanning the tree line I'd just left. Nothing moved. Then, from behind me, the faint tap, tap, tap. I spun. One of them stood no more than 20 feet away, halfway up a trunk, its limbs splayed like an insect's. It wasn't wet. It hadn't crossed the stream, which meant the stream wasn't the barrier I'd hoped for. It tilted its head slowly, like it was listening to something far away. Then it dropped, not down, but sideways, vanishing into the shadows between trees with unnatural speed. I didn't trust the quiet. I pushed deeper into the forest, moving as fast as my frozen legs would carry me. Every few steps, I'd glance back. Every time, I half expected to see one clinging to a tree right above me. After what felt like hours, a pale shape appeared ahead. A clearing. Relief lasted one heartbeat before I saw what was in the middle of it. Not snow, not rock. A mound. And scattered all around it, partially buried in frost, were bones. Human bones. The tap, tap, tap started again. Only this time it came from all directions. The clearing was wrong. Not just in the way the snow didn't quite settle evenly, or the way the air seemed heavier here. It was wrong in the way my instincts screamed before I'd even stepped into it. The mound at its center rose about 4 feet high, a smooth swell beneath a dusting of frost. Bones jutted from its edges like splintered roots. Ribs curved upward, femurs snapped clean through, a skull with its jaw missing. Some were old, pitted, and gray. Others were fresh enough that the marrow hadn't yet been picked clean. I crouched low at the tree line, scanning for movement. The tap, tap, tap still surrounded me, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. It came in irregular bursts, sometimes near, sometimes far, like the forest itself was breathing. My radio was useless, just static. My rifle felt heavier than ever, the barrel trembling slightly in my cold, numbed hands. I thought of firing into the air just to break the silence, but something deep in me knew that noise might be an invitation rather than a warning. Then I saw it. A pale hand, thin as bone, sliding slowly out from the far side of the mound. It gripped the earth, fingers sinking into the frost without leaving prints. Another hand followed, then a head. The face was long, almost human, but stretched, the skin drawn tight over sharp ridges. Its eyes caught the moonlight like wet stone. No pupils, no whites, just black glass. It crawled forward on all fours, not toward me, but toward the bones scattered across the ground. It picked one up delicately, almost reverently, and placed it onto the mound. The mound shifted. Something underneath it moved. I realized then the mound wasn't a pile of dirt. It was a covering, a shroud over something larger. The bones weren't scattered, they'd been arranged. The crawling thing froze mid-motion. Its head turned, not all at once, but in jerks like it had, to force its neck to obey. Its eyes fixed on me. My body locked. The forest around me seemed to hold its breath. From the shadows at the edge of the clearing, two more figures emerged. They moved differently, upright, slow, deliberate. Their limbs were too long, their joints bending in ways that made my stomach turn. Each carried something in its hands, lengths of frozen sinew, braided like rope. They weren't hunting me. They were bringing me. I backed away, but the tree line behind me wasn't empty anymore. A shape blocked the path, tall, impossibly thin, its head nearly brushing the low branches. It didn't move toward me. Instead, it stepped aside, opening a narrow gap between two trees, a path deeper into the forest. Every instinct screamed not to follow. But when I looked back toward the clearing, the crawling thing had risen to its full height, bones falling from its hands. The mound shuddered again, a deep, wet sound rolling up from beneath it. Something under there was waking up. The path was narrow and dark, framed by trees that seemed to lean inward unnaturally. I forced my legs to move, keeping my rifle up, scanning every shadow. The tap, tap, tap followed, steady now, like a heartbeat I couldn't escape. After maybe 100 yards, the trees broke again, not into another clearing, but into a circle of old wooden posts, half rotten and covered in strange carved symbols. Inside the circle was something that looked like an altar, built from stacked stones and smeared with something dark that had frozen in streaks. And sitting cross-legged on the altar was a man in a tattered army uniform, smiling at me with teeth that were far too many for his mouth. He shouldn't have been alive. The uniform was an older pattern, faded almost to gray. The name patch was torn off, and the fabric clung to him like wet paper. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and stretched thin over his cheekbones. But it was his smile that froze me. Too wide, too many teeth, each one narrow and sharp. "Been a while since they sent one like you," he said, voice dry as dead leaves. I didn't lower my rifle. "Who are you?" His head tilted, the movement unnervingly slow. "Name doesn't matter. Not anymore. I was like you once. Guard duty. Alone. Listening to the trees breathe." The tap, tap, tap echoed faintly from somewhere behind me. He glanced toward the sound with amusement, as if it were an inside joke. "They've been watching you," he continued. "Testing you." The symbols on the wooden posts seemed to shimmer in my peripheral vision, though the moonlight hadn't changed. A cold wind swirled through the clearing, bringing with it a smell like wet copper. "Who's they?" I asked. He grinned wider, gums pale and dry. "The ones under the roots, the ones who keep the forest fed." His eyes didn't blink. In fact, I realized with a sick jolt I hadn't seen him breathe since I arrived. "What do they want from me?" His smile faltered just slightly. "The same thing they wanted from me, and from the others before me. To stay. To serve." A sudden rustle in the tree line made me spin. Two of the long-limbed figures from the clearing stepped into view, their heads bowed as if in deference. They carried more braided sinew ropes, which they laid at the base of the altar. The man didn't move to take them. Instead, he looked back at me. "If you run, they'll find you. If you fight, they'll break you. Best you can do is kneel." I tightened my grip on the rifle. "Not happening." His laugh was hollow, without air. I said the same thing. One of the Fa, Igorus, turned its head toward me. Its face, if it could be called that, was smooth, featureless except for two shallow depressions where eyes might have been. It began to sway, side to side, the motion hypnotic. The man's voice dropped to a whisper. "Careful. Once you look too long, they take more than your eyes." I stepped back toward the path, heart hammering. The man's smile returned, but now it seemed sad. "If you go that way, you'll reach the mound again. If you go the other way, you'll find the roots." "I'll take my chances," I said, backing toward the darkness. He didn't follow. "They've already marked you. Every breath you take in this forest feeds them. Every beat of your heart draws them closer." The tap, tap, tap grew louder, closer, as though pacing my retreat. I turned and pushed into the trees, the sound following me like a second heartbeat. After a few minutes, I risked a glance back, but the altar was gone. The circle of posts was gone. Even the path behind me looked different. Only the tapping remained. The darkness ahead broke into another clearing, smaller, cramped, and filled with the stench of rot. In the center was a pit, ringed with stones carved in the same strange symbols. Something writhed inside it, pale and slow, like a nest of roots that weren't quite roots. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that I'd found the place the man had called the roots. The pit breathed. Not in the way lungs do, but in a slow, heaving expansion, as if the earth itself swelled and contracted under some hidden pulse. The roots, if they were roots, twisted in slow motion, pale and glistening in the faint light. Every so often, one would curl upward, seeking the air before retreating into the dark. The stench hit harder the closer I stepped. A thick, metallic rot, like a slaughterhouse left to decay in the summer heat. My eyes watered, my stomach threatened revolt, but something kept me moving toward it. The tap, tap, tap had stopped. The sudden silence was worse. I crouched near the edge, trying to see deeper. That's when I noticed it, shapes embedded among the roots. Not stones, not soil. Faces, human faces. Some still had scraps of flesh clinging to bone, their mouths open in perpetual screams. Others were nothing more than smooth, bleached skulls, their eye sockets filled with slow-crawling worms. The roots threaded through them, in and out of jaws, weaving skulls together like beads on a necklace. A voice drifted from the dark, not from behind me, from below. "You're late." I froze. The voice was distorted, as though bubbling up through thick water, but I recognized the cadence. The man from the altar. His words rose from deep beneath the surface of the writhing roots. "You walked the wrong path. Now you see where it ends." I gripped my rifle tighter. What is this place? The roots shifted, opening slightly, revealing a deeper blackness. This is the belly, the forest's hunger. Something wet touched my boot. I looked down to see a thin tendril, pale and slick, curling around my ankle. I kicked back, but another slithered up my leg, cold and strong. The movement was deliberate, almost gentle, like the fingers of a hand testing my weight. I fired. The shot rang out in the clearing, deafening. The muzzle flash, briefly lighting the pit. For an instant I saw the truth. The roots weren't roots at all. They were tendons, muscle, veins. The ground beneath me shifted. From the depths, something massive stirred, its movement sending tremors through the clearing. The tendrils withdrew from my leg, retreating into the pit like snakes into a hole. I took a step back, then another. The voice came again, quieter now. "You can leave, for now, but it will call you back. We all come back." The surface of the pit began to seal, the pale tendrils weaving themselves into a tight, tangled mat until it looked like nothing more than a root-choked hollow. Only the smell lingered. I turned to leave, and froze. On the far edge of the clearing, half hidden in shadow, stood three figures, the tall, long-limbed ones, their heads tilted in perfect unison. One held something in its hand. No, not something. Someone. The limp body hung like a rag doll, its uniform matching mine. The face was mine, too. My breath caught. The thing holding it didn't move. The other two stepped aside as if offering me a path forward. I backed away, But no matter where I turned, the trees seemed to close in, the moonlight dying between the branches. Somewhere far off, the tap, tap, tap started again, impossibly slow. By the time I found the path back to the outpost, my boots were wet, and I didn't know if it was from the mud or from what had touched me in the pit. When I reached the outpost, the door was already open. I knew I'd locked it. The wind outside had died, leaving the forest eerily still, but inside, the air was colder. I stepped in, rifle raised, my flashlight cutting across the narrow room. My cot was untouched, the radio silent, but then I saw it. Boots by the wall. My boots. I looked down at my own feet, still wearing mine. A scrape sounded behind me. I spun, sweeping the beam toward the desk. A figure stood in the corner, head tilted, its face in shadow. The rifle in my hands felt suddenly too light. "Who's there?" My voice was low, tight. It stepped forward. The light caught its face, my face. The copy wore my uniform, my boots, even the tear in my left sleeve. But its skin was too pale, like paper stretched over bone. The eyes were wrong, too dark, as if ink had filled them. It smiled. The expression didn't touch the eyes. "You shouldn't have gone to the roots," it said in my voice, only flatter. "I don't know what you are," I said. "I am you," it replied, as if correcting a child. "I've been here longer than you think." It moved closer, silent on the wooden floor. I backed toward the wall. My finger hovered over the trigger, but a deep instinct screamed that shooting it might not end anything, and might start something worse. "Why are you here?" I asked. "To take your place," it said simply. "The forest doesn't like empty stations." The room's shadows deepened, stretching along the walls until they seemed to pool around its feet. The air felt heavy, pressing on my chest. Then it blinked, too slow, too deliberate, and when its eyes opened again, the darkness inside them seemed to spread into the room, dimming the flashlight beam. I fired. The blast echoed off the walls. The thing staggered but didn't fall. Instead, its smile widened, and where the bullet had struck, the skin rippled lasso. Ike disturbed water before sealing shut. "You can't kill what you already are," it whispered. Then it lunged. We hit the floor hard, my rifle clattering away. It was stronger than me, its grip ice cold. Its breath, if that's what it was, reeked of damp soil and rot. I fought, driving my knee into its side, twisting until I broke free. I grabbed my knife from my belt and slashed. This time the cut didn't heal instantly. Thick, black fluid seeped out, smelling of iron and decay. The copy hissed, not in pain, but in anger. "You'll have to sleep sometime," it said. It backed toward the open door, its eyes never leaving mine. "I'll be watching," it added, stepping outside. In the next blink, it was gone, swallowed by the trees as if it had never been there. I stood in the doorway, my heart hammering. The forest was silent again, but that was worse. Somewhere out there, something wore my face, and it had patience. I closed the door, locked it, shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. But I didn't sit, didn't rest. Because I knew if I closed my eyes, I might wake up in the woods, and the thing would be here instead. The forest was black glass. No stars, no moon. Even the air felt heavier, as if light itself had been swallowed. I checked my watch 3 times, 2,300 hours, but it felt like midnight had been hanging over me for days. I stayed at the desk, rifle across my lap, the lantern low. Outside, the tree line looked closer than usual. I knew it was just my nerves, but that didn't make it easier to watch. Around midnight, the radio crackled. Not the usual static. This was faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing. I leaned in. "Outpost," a voice rasped. I froze. It was my voice. "Identify yourself," I said, keeping it steady. Silence then. "You left the door unlocked." I stood, scanning the room, still locked. Chair still wedged under the handle. But the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the headset itself, as if the speaker were pressed against the mic. The voice returned, whispering, "It's cold in the trees." The lantern flickered. The temperature dropped sharply. I could see my own breath inside. Every instinct screamed to shut the radio off, but I couldn't move. It was like the sound rooted me in place. Then the static shifted into something else, faint footsteps crunching over snow. But it was August, and then I heard them outside. I moved to the window, nothing but darkness. The steps circled the outpost slowly, deliberate as a predator testing a cage. When they stopped, I felt more afraid than when they started. The knock came, soft, 3 taps. The chair under the door trembled slightly, not from the force of the knock, but as if the wood were reacting to something colder pressing against it. "Let me in," the voice whispered. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the wall beside it. I backed away. My breath sounded too loud in the silence. The knock came again, this time from the opposite wall, then the rear, the wall, then the ceiling. It was above me. I grabbed the lantern and pointed it upward. The wood looked normal, but I heard it, a slow drag, like fingers trailing across the beams. Then came a low thud. Dust fell. Something was crawling up there. I edged toward the trap door that led to the roof access. My hands trembled on the latch, but I had to know. I pulled it open and thrust the lantern up. The beam caught nothing, but I smelled it. That same damp, rotten soil stench. A whisper drifted down. Almost time. I slammed the hatch shut and locked it. For the next hour, the crawling never stopped. It traced the shape of the outpost over and over, pausing directly above me before moving on. My shoulders ached from holding the rifle ready. Then, without warning, it went silent. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, 20, still nothing. I was about to set the rifle down when a hand, pale, thin, with 2 long fingers, slid down the glass of the window beside me. It left a streak, like frost. Then it withdrew. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. By morning, the forest looked normal again, but I knew the night without a moon wasn't over. It was just waiting for me to be tired enough to make a mistake. At 0200 hours, the door shuddered. Not a knock this time, a hard, single impact that rattled the chair bracing it. My eyes snapped open. I hadn't meant to drift off, but fatigue had won for a moment. Outside, the forest was still, no wind, no sound. I approached the door slowly, rifle raised. "Identify yourself," I called. My voice felt too loud in the silence. No answer. Another impact shook the frame. The lantern light trembled across the walls. The air felt heavier again, pressing down on my lungs. Something slid under the door, a thin black smear like wet soil, but it moved on its own. It twisted and coiled, seeping toward my boots. I stepped back fast, heart thudding. The smear halted as if it were watching me. Then it retreated under the door, vanishing like water sucked into the ground. I didn't have time to process before the sound started overhead. That dragging crawl again, but faster this time. Direct. The trapdoor latch jiggled. I aimed up. "Don't," I whispered, though I knew it wouldn't listen. The latch turned halfway. I fired. The shot tore through the wood, splintering the hatch. Silence followed. Thick, suffocating silence. Then glass shattered. I spun toward the right side window just in time to see a pale arm reach in, fingers bending the frame outward. It wasn't forcing entry. It was testing, measuring. I fired again. The arm withdrew instantly, vanishing into the dark. The radio came alive, but not with static. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. "You can't keep me out," the voice said. Not mine this time. Deeper, layered, like more than one person speaking in unison. The breathing turned to a low chuckle, then cut off. I moved fast, shoved a table against the broken window, reinforced the door with sandbags from the supply corner. My training kept my hands steady, but my mind was screaming. Every instinct told me this wasn't just physical. Whatever it was, it could get inside if it truly wanted to. Hours passed in that tense half-light, each creak of the wood making me twitch. My eyes burned from not blinking enough. Then the forest made a sound it hadn't before, everything at once. Branches snapping, leaves thrashing, the distant, sharp cries of animals I'd never heard here. Something was moving through the trees, and it wasn't alone. Through the cracked window, I saw movement. Not shapes, shadows without bodies. They slid from tree to tree, pausing at the edge of the clearing. Then one stepped forward. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was tall, skin stretched too tight, eyes like wet stones reflecting lantern light. Its head tilted slowly, studying the outpost. It opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't a roar or a scream. It was the exact sound of my mother's voice, calling my name the way she used to when I was a child. I almost opened the door. Almost. Then the others appeared. Dozens, ringing the clearing, their eyes catching the dim light. No movement, no sound, just watching. The one in front leaned forward, pressing its hands into the soil. Fingers spread, nails long and black. The ground beneath my boots trembled. I gripped the rifle so hard my knuckles ached. Then, without warning, the front door latch turned on its own. The chair bracing it began to slide. They weren't going to wait anymore. The breach had begun. The chair slid across the floor with a slow scrape that seemed louder than gunfire. I raised my rifle, aiming at the center of the door, finger tightening on the trigger. The latch turned once, stopped, turned back. They were toying with me. I shouted into the dark, "You want me? Come through." The wind answered. No, not wind. Whispers, dozens of them, layered over each other. Some sounded like my own voice, some like the voices of people I'd buried. The door burst inward. The first figure through was not one of the pale ones. It was a deer, neck bent at an impossible angle, eyes milky white. It stumbled toward me, legs jerking like a puppet's. I fired. The deer collapsed, but didn't stop moving. Something else came through behind it. Tall, lean, and grinning with a mouth far too wide. It ducked low, moving faster than my eyes could track. The shot I took grazed its shoulder. No blood, it didn't even flinch. More poured in, shapes I recognized from the tree line, moving with inhuman grace. I backpedaled, firing at center mass, aiming for heads. Some fell, some didn't. The air grew thick and hot, the smell of rot and wet soil filling my lungs. One reached for me. Its fingers brushed my cheek and my vision warped. The room vanished. Suddenly, I was standing in my childhood home. My mother was at the table, smiling, calling my name softly. It felt real. So real, I almost dropped my rifle. Then she turned her head, and her eyes were black pits, her smile tearing wider until it split her jaw. I pulled the trigger. The vision shattered, and I was back in the outpost. The creature in front of me fell, its skull gone. The others hesitated, as if my refusal broke something in them. I used it, grabbed 2 grenades from my belt, yanked the pins, and hurled them into the largest cluster by the door. The blast shook the walls, showering the room with splinters and dust. Screeches filled the night, high-pitched, wrong, almost metallic. I ran for the radio. "This is Outpost Echo. Hostiles breached. Request immediate evac." Static swallowed my voice. Then the static spoke back. "No one's coming." The shadows moved again, this time slipping along the walls, ignoring the door entirely. They passed through wood as if it wasn't there. I retreated to the ammo crate, reloaded, heart pounding so hard my vision pulsed. One emerged from the floor right in front of me, rising out of the boards like smoke solidifying. Its face was mine. It smiled. I emptied the magazine into it. Bullets passed through, thudding into the far wall. The heat rose to a suffocating level. My vision tunneled. I grabbed the last claymore from under the cot, set it facing the main breach, and backed toward the rear exit. They advanced together now, a wall of pale, grinning faces. I waited until they crossed the trigger line. The explosion tore half the outpost apart. The blast wave threw me into the trees. When I woke, the forest was silent again. Smoke drifted from the ruin of the outpost. Bodies, if you could call them that, lay scattered, but already their edges blurred, fading into the soil. I staggered to my feet. No sign of rescue. No sound of helicopters. Then, from deep in the trees, a single pair of eyes opened. Wet stone, catching the faint dawn light. Watching. Still here,